going to be looking at Genesis 50 and some of the ramifications that come from that. And as we start this chapter, something Mary said would be good to be reminded of. And that is, almost everything in the physical has a spiritual corollary. You can flip it and say it the other way. But sometimes in Christianity, we've had a tendency to deny the physical and the actual and say that the spiritual is more important. And the truth is that really both are important. And as we read through this, we'll bring out some of those things. It's kind of interesting to me that when you look at Judaism, it has tended to emphasize the physical. Christianity has tended to emphasize the spiritual. And so if you go to a church, the question will be, are you going to heaven? Which I don't know why we ask that question. Yeshua never did, but we get it all the time. In fact, whenever you take an evangelism course, that's the question you ask people. Well, the Jews aren't worried about going to heaven. They want to know, how are you going to redeem the time that you're here on earth? And when you think about it, both perspectives are very important, and both perspectives are necessary. You know, have you ever noticed that sometimes in trying to make a point, we devalue another point? And the truth is, we need the spiritual and the physical. They're intimately connected. Genesis 50. When Joseph fell on his father's face, remembered Jacob had just blessed his sons, and he's on his deathbed, and wept over him and kissed him. Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. Now 40 days were required for it, for such is the period required for embalming. It seems kind of long. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. It's a good thing not too many important people died, or nothing would have ever done that. 40 days to embalm, 70 days to mourn. When the days of mourning for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am about to die. In my grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. This is, when you read this chapter, that's the statement that you need to hang on to. I'm dying, but it's important where I'm buried. Now therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, then I will return. Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, and all the household of Joseph and his brothers and his father's household. They left only their little ones and their flocks and their herds in the land of Goshen. So this company that goes back to Canaan is a huge group of people, and important people. They also went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they lamented there with a very great and sorrowful lamentation. And he observed 7 days mourning for his father. Now when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians. Therefore it was named Abel Mitzrayim, which is beyond the Jordan. Thus his sons did for him as he had charged them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan, and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham had bought along with the field for a burial site from Ephron the Hittite. After he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, What, Joseph bears a grudge against us, and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him. So they sent a message to Joseph, saying, Your father charged before he died, saying, Thus you shall say to Joseph, Please forgive, I beg you, the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, Behold, we are your servants. But Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to to preserve many people alive. So therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Now Joseph stayed in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Now if you remember, in the family, 110 years is a striker. Abraham and Isaac is 180 and 175. And Jacob was 147. So the life expectancy is dropping. They must have started drinking coke, so I'll think of that. Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons, and also the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on Joseph's knees. This is just saying Joseph saw his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, his family. Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. A lot of things here that I certainly don't know all the prophetic pictures. Interesting that Joseph didn't tell them to take him right to the land. He just said, when you go back, take me. In other words, I'm staying here until you go back. Jacob said, you take me right now. One of the most important things this tells us about both Jacob and Joseph is that Egypt was not their home. And that's something all of us can remember. Egypt is not our home. And it also reminds us that the body is important. When I was growing up in the house of Aaron, and I think it was particularly Sister Helen, but there was almost a phobia about death. You didn't mention death. You acted like it didn't occur. It does. People die. They have a body. Something needs to be done. And I can remember growing up, it was almost like we pretended that people didn't die. And we didn't talk about it. And if songs had, I think Rock of Ages has a line that says, when my eyes are closed in death, we canceled that out and didn't sing that verse. And the truth is, you die. Your body is going to die. It's important, but it's not eternal. It's not all there is. And as I mentioned earlier, Judaism and Christianity almost have a tension at this point, where Christianity tends to emphasize this going to heaven thing, where Judaism is emphasizing either redeeming the time we live in now or preparing for the Messianic age to come. And I see value in both of them. But sometimes, I don't know about you, but I'll listen to sermons, and here's my view, is that if I do the right thing, I get a get out of jail free card. Or I get fire insurance. And what's interesting is to ever take that point of view and try to force it back on Yeshua or the apostles or Paul. They don't talk that way. And yet they do definitely say that to be in my body is to not be at home with the Lord. It does say that. There is this tension. But what I think is interesting about both Joseph and Jacob, because there's arguments within Judaism, and you see this at the time of Yeshua. Remember, some of the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. Do you remember that? Now, the Bible says that the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, but we know that's not totally true, because John the Baptist was a Sadducee. But there was this argument. But both Joseph and Jacob tell us, by the fact that it matters where their bones are buried, that there's life after death. Because if all that was going to be is this life here, who would care what you did with their bones? It's over, I'm done. Doesn't matter. It's a sense that there is an eternity, there is purpose, and that God has a purpose, a place for us, even after we die. Both Jacob and Joseph want to be buried at home at Machpelah. And here's the interesting thing. In the we have several cases where God goes out of his way to make sure we know that money was exchanged, that land was purchased, and there's a deed. This is one of them. Genesis 23. Abraham gets up and he spoke to the Canaanites. If it is your wish for me to bury my dead out of my sight, hear me and approach Ephron the son of Zohar for me. This is Genesis 23. That he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his field. For the full price let him give it to me in your presence for a burial site. Now Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth. And Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the sons of Heth, even of all who went in at the gate of his city, saying, No, my lord, hear me, I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. In the presence of the sons of my people I give it to you. Bury your dead. And Abraham bowed before the people of the land. He spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, If you will only please listen to me, I will give the price of the field, accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. What's Abraham saying? I don't want you to give me the ground. I'll buy it. This is important. Then Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, My lord, listen to me. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between me and you? So bury your dead. How many of you know that is an exorbitant price? Go back and look and see what a shekel of silver is worth at this time. He is charging downtown Salt Lake prices. Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, commercial standard. So Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, which faced Mamre, the field and cave which was in it, and all the trees which were in the field that were within all the confines of its border were deeded over to Abraham for a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth, before all who went in at the gate of the city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that is in it were deeded over to Abraham for a burial site by the sons of Heth. Why was it so important to Jacob to be buried there? 4 couples are buried in Machpelah. And it's an interesting thing. I'm going to just stop for a minute and have you reflect. Probably won't be able to finish this morning. Maybe I'll finish it tonight. Think with me. What other pieces of ground in Israel do we have a recording of a payment being made in a deed? You remember with Jeremiah? When they were getting ready to be taken into captivity, he said, I'm going to buy this land for this amount of money and get a deed. And you're thinking, you're about to be kicked out of this land. You're never going to be here again. He did it as a sign that God would restore the people to that land. But Machpelah, where the patriarchs were buried. What's the other one? Where someone tried to give it to somebody and he wouldn't allow it to. It's the Temple Mount. David. Recall? When the plague came upon Israel because of David's sin, and David saw the avenging angel with the sword over Jerusalem, he bought the threshing floor of Iran and made a sacrifice there. That is the rock where Abraham offered Isaac, and that is the rock under the dome of the rock today. And remember, Araunah said, King, you want this? You can have it. And David says, I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing. He paid the price, and a good price, for the offering, the wood, and the place. I bring this up because in the world today, 2 of the most contested places are the cave of Machpelah and the Temple Mount. And people say, you have no right to this land. God's pretty smart. And in a book, you realize that when Abraham bought that property is over 3,500 years ago. It's closer to 4,000 years ago. And David is around 3,000. I'll read you some things here. One of the most famous pieces of real estate on earth is the Cave of Machpelah, also known as the Cave of the Patriarchs, in the southern Israeli city of Hebron. What does the world call the area where Hebron is? The settlements. The West Bank. It's nonsense. Machpelah means doubled in Hebrew. One of the things you'll notice when you look at what God plans to do in restoring everything today is he keeps saying over and over in many places, the reward will be doubled. You'll see that in the writing. Then his reward shall be doubled. Machpelah means double. There's 4 couples buried here. Adam and Eve, and I've never heard that one before. Only the Jews, that's a new one to me. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah. And of course there's also Joseph there. It's the most ancient Jewish site, and it's the second holiest for the Jewish people, after, of course, the Temple Mount. The cave and the adjoining field were purchased at full market price by Abraham. Rachel was missing because, of course, if you remember, she died in childbirth on their way. The double cave is a mystery of thousands of years, was uncovered several years ago beneath the massive building. There's a huge building sitting there on that site today. And when they excavated here, they found artifacts from the early Israelite period, some 3,000 years ago. The structure that's there now was built during the Second Temple period, which would be around the time of Herod, around the time of Yeshua. And it was built by Herod. It was providing a place of gatherings and Jewish prayers at the graves of the patriarchs. This uniquely impressive building is the only one that stands intact and still fulfills its original function after thousands of years. It's the only building in Israel that's still there and still represents what it was built for. Foreign conquerors and invaders used the site for their own purposes, depending on their religious orientation. The Byzantines and the Crusaders turned it into a church. The Muslims made it a mosque. About 700 years ago, the Muslim Mamelukes conquered Hebron, declared the structure a mosque, and forbade entry to Jews, who were not allowed to pass the 7th step on the staircase outside the building. Upon the liberation of Hebron in 1967, the chief rabbi of the Israeli Defense Forces, the late Major General Rabbi Shlomo Goren, was the first Jew to enter the cave of Machpelah. Since then, Jews have been struggling to regain their prayer rights at the site. It's still run by the Muslim Waqf, W-A-Q-F, say that. The religious trust that took control during the Arab conquest. Here's the interesting thing, and I'm not going to read all of this. Over 300,000 people visit the site every year. It has 3 big rooms in this building, one for Abraham, one for Isaac, and one for Jacob. This site, which is Judaism's second most sacred site, they can't go there. After Israel conquered the land, they turned the control back over to the Waqf. I'm pointing this out. I don't know if I'll have time to get to it, so I'm just going to put it out there so you can think about it. These struggles are pictures of you and me finding our home and our inheritance. And we shouldn't be surprised when we find opposition. But something I would tell you that you need to understand. Do not, in the interest of being kind, let somebody occupy your inheritance at your exclusion. I consider it the stupidest thing I've ever heard of for the Jews to have conquered Hebron and to have conquered the Temple Mount. And to keep world opinion happy, they turned their holiest sites over to people that won't allow them to pray there. God doesn't want you to do that. You don't need to hate people, but you need... What did God love about Jacob? That Jacob wanted his inheritance with everything that was a thing. He was going to go home, and when he died, he said, don't you bury me here, you take me home. You take me where my grandfather purchased the place. I want to be in my inheritance. Don't you leave me outside of what God called me to be. And I find it incredible that the Jews, trying to be kind and understanding, have turned the control of the cave at Machpelah and the Temple Mount. I've been to the Temple Mount several times. You can't pray on the Temple Mount because you're a Christian. And if you're a Jew and they see your lips moving, they'll banish you from the site. And especially what the Jews want to do when they get on there, they want to fall on their faces toward the most holy place of worship. And if that were to happen, it's likely they'd be killed. All this to say, that's in the natural, it's in the physical, but it is real. Do you realize God says, this is the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever. On the Temple Mount. Does God live in the whole world? Yes. But does he have places? Yes. That's one of his places. You know, Dave was up here showing us the calendar, where we must never forget that the names of the feast are really appointments. God has appointments in place, he has appointments in time. And when we say, doesn't matter, we can worship whenever we want, of course you can. But if God, the master of the universe, has a time, he says, this place in eternity, the seventh day of the week will be my time to meet with you, I would suggest that you do that. It isn't the physical, it isn't the real, and it reflects the supernatural and the spiritual. To deny either one of them devalues the entirety. Which is why in this day, Jews and Christians must come together and need each other. There is nothing that establishes the truth of the Scripture like the reality of the Jew. I'm going to read you something Mark Twain said. This was incredible. The only thing is I've got to find it. If the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. Now it's much smaller. It's smaller. It suggests a nebulous dim star, a nebulous dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jews ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, are also way out of proportion in the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all the ages and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now, or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? When they asked the general of the Kaiser's armies in Prussia, Germany, because he was a strong believer, they asked him, what evidence do you have that the Bible is true? And he said, Your Majesty, the Jews. Can you explain this small of a number of people having this promise? And what's more, the size of the land of Israel approximates New Jersey. Why does the news of Israel dominate the news because it's God's priority. And I think I've got time to do this. There's a great letter written to John Kerry by the Times of Israel. And this is admittedly pro-Israel. I am. Get used to it. But it's not anti-Palestinian. There's a big difference. See, what I've noticed in the last few months is that the anti-Israel forces in the world would have you believe they're pro-Palestinian, but they are not. This soda stream, most of you probably didn't watch the Super Bowl. It was a great disappointment. Like a high school team and a pro team. Something happened there. But there was an advertisement about SodaStream, and it's homemade carbonated beverages. It is a company that's based in Israel. It has several, at least one big factory, maybe a couple, in the area known as the settlements. Guys, there's no such thing as the settlements. In a war, Israel won that land. They've allowed the Palestinians to continue to live in that land, but it is Israel. Tell me when there was a nation called Palestine. The answer is never. But this plant in the so-called settlement employs nearly 100 Palestinian Arabs, pays them 8 times the wage that they are making in their land. And yet, our boycott, divestment, and sanctions group in the U.S. is boycotting SodaStream because of where that plant is. They don't care about the Palestinians. They went and they asked the Palestinians what they thought. They said, these are the greatest employers in the world. We love working for these people. They take care of us. They take care of our families. Don't you threaten this plant. And yet, so what I want you to know is that what in the world is faking itself and pretending to be pro-Palestinian is anti-Israel. It's against Israel. It does not want Israel to have a right to exist. And where does that come from? It's the same force that does not want you and me to be in our heavenly place with the Messiah. We do have an inheritance. Their inheritance is connected to the land, and we are connected to them, and we do have an inheritance in the Lord. But I hope you can understand that that which is in the world today, which is fighting Israel, Israel makes mistakes, don't misunderstand me. But there's something that says they don't have a right to be there. That is the anti-Messiah. That is the thing that denies the truth of God's word. Dear Secretary of State John Kerry, because of my respect for the United States, I will attempt to afford you the honor you think you so richly deserve. I think he's sarcastic. It's hard to speak to you with anything but anger, hard to feel the need again to start from the beginning because you clearly choose to ignore history in your quest for glory. It is a quest destined to fail, but its outcome, even, or more accurately, especially in failure, will hurt Israel. Greater men than you have tried to force peace on the Middle East. I promise you, you will fail too. You will fail because you are not addressing the root cause of the problem. You, like so many before you, take the easy way out. Blame Israel. It's easy to do, and so stupid. I could speak to you of history, a history longer and greater than you can imagine. I could speak to you of injustices. Yes, our land is filled with the graves of those murdered for the unjust reason that they lived here, or traveled abroad, or ate in the wrong restaurant, or took the wrong bus. I could speak to you of justice, of a population exchange similar to those that have taken place throughout history as nations settle between war and peace. They left their lands to go there, most voluntarily, so that their invading brothers would have a clear path as they pushed the Jews into the sea. And our people who left their homes and possessions in Arab lands, most forced, not voluntarily, and came here. What they're saying, does anyone hear anybody talk about the Jews of Iraq, Iran, the whole Middle East, who left their homes? Is anybody talking about their right to return? Of course not. We fed our brothers, clothed them, gave them homes, and most importantly, we loved them. We gave them the most precious of gifts, a future, a present, as integral parts of the land and people of this country. My neighbor, the family across the street, they live in the same house as I do, drive the same cars, attend the same schools. He is an engineer, he's a judge in the court, she's a nurse, she's a lawyer. All my neighbors, though their grandparents came here with nothing. And at the same time, across many borders, the Arabs put their brothers in refugee camps, all but starved them. They raised them to be embittered, not at those who kept them in squalor, but those they had hoped to defeat. They blame us, and you are naive enough to blame us as well. They chose war, John Kerry, while we chose compromise. And you would blame us for this horrible chain of the decades? They invaded 5 Arab nations in 1949. They attacked out of sheer desperation. We want enough of our land to give us a measure of security. It lasted only 7 years until they attacked again. But oh, what we did in those 7 years. We welcomed our refugees from Europe, from Arab lands. We built them tent cities and turned them into real cities. We conquered swampland and made it habitable. And we raised our children to dream that someday there would be peace. We created universities and schools and parks. But the Arabs would have none of it. In 1948, in 56, and 67, 73, again and again, almost daily, we fight off their attempts to do in 2000, to fight off their attempts to do in 2014 what they failed to do in 1948. They have not learned, and amazingly enough, John Kerry, neither have you. We have built and evacuated whole communities. We have withdrawn from land in exchange for nothing but the hope that we could appease the unappeasable. We have flown around the world to help others, from earthquakes, tsunamis, devastating storms, famine, and more. We have allowed the Arabs, yes, allowed them to fire tens of thousands of missiles at our cities, and we know they have more than 170,000 more rockets and missiles ready to try again. At any time, and with no notice whatsoever, we have the power to flatten Gaza into the world's largest, flattest parking lot. And each time they attack, we think of it. And no, we can't do it. And we won't do it. And you would blame us for the failure to make peace? When we attempt to stop them, to push back their military capabilities just a bit, we aim for the rocket launchers, the arsenals, the training camps, while they aim for our cities. Beersheba, Sderot, Ashkelon, Negev, Ashdod. And you would threaten us with the ongoing state of war? There cannot be peace until you recognize your enemy. There cannot be successful negotiations if you fail to understand those who would bring to the table. You fail on both counts. After hearing that you threatened Israel unless the peace talks succeed, I can only conclude that your ignorance is even greater than I thought. I knew years ago that you had no clue what the Arab world is thinking, feeling, dreaming of. Now I know that the same is true about Israel. You don't understand us any better than you understand the Arab, and that amazes me. Unlike the Arab world, Israel is an open society. Read our newspapers, speak to the people on the street. No one will stop you, and we won't escort you with secret police to control your experience. Pick any town, city, village, settlement, and you will hear the same thing. Pick any street, any person, and ask them what they dream of, what they want for their children. We do not dream of glorious death and martyrdom for our sons. We dream that they will never have to even serve in the army. I have friends who agonized over their sons going into the army. I could understand my agony as I grew up in the United States, where all my friends promised they would run away from the U.S. before they would ever be drafted. I knew nothing of army and war and guns. But my friends here in Israel, they had served in the army. Why did they suffer so when their sons were drafted? We served so that they wouldn't have to. They never believed 20 years later that their sons and daughters would have to sacrifice 3 years of their lives that would still be at war. You won't hear that in the Arab world. Oh, they'll tell you that they dream of peace because they know that is what you want to hear. But in Arabic, they talk of a time when there will be no Jews in the entire Middle East. Never mind no Jews in the Palestine they envision. Their religious leaders will whip them up to the glory of Allah and jihad. But still you would expect us to make peace with them? Theirs is a culture built on a dream that they will own the world. My corner, John Kerry, and even yours. Theirs is a society that believes in a heaven earned by causing the deaths of others, and so when their sons blow themselves up and kill those Jews, they celebrate. And yes, they celebrated on 9/11 when they killed your people, just as they celebrated when we released their terrorists and killers in yet another attempt to appease them and you. If you don't understand their ability to celebrate, I will confess that neither do I. I have seen the mothers hugging their sons in a video made the night before they killed themselves. And the innocent men, women, and children of their enemies who happened to be on that bus, in that mall, or asleep in their homes. It doesn't matter to them if they kill a soldier, a man with a gun, a pregnant woman, a helpless child. The more the better in their twisted interpretation of what their God wants. You don't understand this, and I can see where it is hard, given your Western mentality. But not understanding it doesn't give you the right to ignore it. You won't fail in your goal of ramming peace down our throats because of this, however. You will fail because, amazingly enough, you don't even understand Israel. We are the easiest to get, the easiest honestly. All you have to do is listen and see. But even that is beyond you. Listen to our national anthem. It does not speak of war. It is called the Hope, and speaks of a dream of 2,000 years to be a free people. We value that, the ability to protect ourselves, to be free in the land of our forefathers. Even the most right-wing among us would be willing to compromise for a real peace. A peace where our children and grandchildren can live without the fears we deal with daily. We do not interfere in how they raise their children. We are stupid enough even to fund some of their textbooks, all in our own misguided belief that we can make peace with those who do not want it. You threaten us with economic sanctions, with international isolation. This is your latest blunder, and it is a big one. Israel was laughing at you this morning. Economic sanctions? They gassed us, beat us, bombed us, burned us. They haunted us, hunted us, hated us through the centuries across many lands, and through this land in the last several decades. They burned the synagogue where my grandmother was hiding. They gassed my great-grandmother to death. International isolation? They put us in ghettos. They exploded our buses and shot our babies in the head. They lynched my neighbor, attacked the buses on which my friends traveled. They shot my daughter's teacher and his infant son, and ambushed and killed a colleague of mine. We're fighting for our lives, John Kerry. No less today than we were in 1948. The only difference is that through the greed and stupidity of the Arab nations, we are stronger than we ever were, not weaker. You will fail, John Kerry, because you are fool enough to think that you can come here, wave your American flag, look at your watch, and tell us you'd like to finish these peace negotiations by 5 p.m. because you have a date at the opera or a baseball game to go to. For a long time now, the Arabs have fooled you. They'll speak to you of peace over the coffee they serve you, and then when you leave the room, they slap each other on the backs and laugh. Another successful day making the U.S. look stupid. Now this time we will have that in common with the Arabs. We are laughing at you too. Naphtali Bennett has tried to explain it to you. There has not yet been a nation that has given up its land due to economic threats, and nor will we. Only security will bring economic stability, not a terrorist state near Ben Gurion Airport. Greater men have failed, John Kerry, and I promise you, until you know Israel, and until you understand the Arabs, you don't have a prayer of succeeding. Go watch the Super Bowl. At least then maybe you'll have done something worthwhile. Here's a little bit. I've gone over something I want to leave with you. We need to be wise today, and we need to understand the connection between spiritual realities and physical realities. The real estate that we call Israel, God has a particular, specific destiny for that land. And you and I, because of our faith in the Messiah, are connected to that destiny. We are connected to those people. And that when we as Christians deny that God has a place for Judah, we shouldn't be surprised when we see ourselves losing the place that God has given us. It is so important to know that we have a home. And just as Abraham paid for Machpelah, our home has been purchased. A price has been paid. And Kai brought that out this morning. It is by his sacrifice that we have had our peace purchased. Don't let anyone, anything separate you from the inheritance that God has given.